and with June officially upon us, which can I just say is craziness, it is time for my May reading wrap-up. Overall, it was a pretty good month. I had some books that I really, really loved, some books that I did not particularly enjoy, and some books that were just sort of in between. Before we jump into those individual books though, let us start with some statistics. Over the month of May, I read a grand total of 12 books for a combined 4,223 pages, averaging 352 pages per book. 92% of those books were new reads and 8% of them were rereads. 58% of those books were standalones and 42% of them were part of a series. When it comes to the genre breakdown, 25% of them were fantasy, 25% of them were contemporary, 17% were thriller, 8% were sci-fi, 8% were faith or theology based, 8% were literary fiction, and 8% were magical realism. 50% of those books were for an adult audience, 42% were for a young adult audience, and 8% of them were for a children or middle grade audience. In regard to the diversity represented within the characters, 8% of the books were nonfiction and therefore did not have any characters, 33% of them had no diversity represented in their characters, 42% of them had ethnic diversity represented in their characters, and 17% of them had multiple kinds of diversity represented in their characters. Of those diverse characters, again, 8% of the books were nonfiction and therefore did not have any characters, but 50% of them had diverse protagonists and 42% of them did not have diverse protagonists. In regard to the setting, 8% of the books took place in a fantasy realm, 8% took place in space, 8% took place in Saudi Arabia, 8% took place in Puerto Rico, 8% took place in the UK, 8% took place in the Czech Republic, and 42% took place in the United States of America. 8% of the books were written by men, 8% of the books were written by authors of both genders, and a whopping 84% of the books were written by women. In regard to their publication date, one book was published in the 1940s, one book was published in the 1970s, 7 books were published between 2010 and 2015, and 3 of the books were or will be published in 2016. When it comes to the star ratings, I gave one book 2.5 stars, one book 3 stars, 3 books 3.5 stars, 4 books 4 stars, 1 book 4.5 stars, and 2 books 5 stars for an average star rating of 3.88. Now that we've finished the statistics, let us jump right into the books. Up first, we have Crown of Midnight by Sarah J. Maas. This is the second book in the Throne of Glass series, which is an ongoing YA fantasy series that follows Selena Sardothian, a notorious assassin. I read the prequel novellas and the first book in this series back in 2015, did not particularly enjoy them, but was encouraged to push forward with the series, and I am pleased to say that things vastly improved in this second book, and I wound up giving it 3.5 out of 5 stars. I have already done a full video review on it, which I will link in the card symbol above and the description below if you would like to hear more thoughts, but I think the general reason that I enjoyed this book so much more than the first two is there was a much tighter and focused plot than I felt like there particularly was in the first book, and that just pulled all of the other strings of the story from the characters and the writing and the pacing and such together in a way that made the story much more compelling and interesting to read. Up next we have The Weight of Glory by C.S. Lewis. This is basically a collection of transcriptions of speeches and sermons that C.S. Lewis gave throughout his life, one of which being titled The Weight of Glory. And as with any collection of things, be it short stories, poetry, etc., you are going to have pieces that you really, really enjoy and pieces that you are sort of indifferent to. And so I wound up giving this collection as a whole 4 out of 5 stars, but there were a few in here in particular that were definitely 5-star reads for me. One of those was the title piece, The Weight of Glory. Another was Is Theology Poetry, and by far my favorite piece in the entire collection was the final one, which is called A Slip of the Tongue, and if you have never read that piece and you are a fan of C.S. Lewis, you gotta do it immediately. Up next we have Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. This is the first book in a sort of paranormal-ish fantasy series. We follow a girl named Khoury who lives in Prague and attends a fine arts school there, but was raised by this group of individuals called the Chimamera, I think is how it's pronounced, and so she sort of sits back and forth in this tension between her normal life and the life that she was raised in, and all sorts of crazy things happen, and I was a little bit indifferent to most of the book as I was reading through it. For the vast majority of it, it was a pretty solid 3, maybe 3.5 star book. I did enjoy Khoury. I really love Susanna. She is probably my favorite character in the series so far, but like I said, it was feeling kind of meh for me, but the ending, when a lot of big reveals start to happen and different parts of the story start to pull together, the pacing picks up, etc., it just really, really grabbed my attention, and so I wound up giving the book 4 out of 5 stars. Up next, we have A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan. This was my next Pulitzer Prize read for the year. I believe this won the award back in 2011, if I remember correctly, and I went into this book not really knowing much about it, but this is effectively a collection of short stories that all sort of revolve around 2 central characters. You start with one character and then move to the other main character, and then from there you start to shift to other people that they are tangentially connected to throughout their lives, and so it hops around back and forth in time as you hop from character to character. And while I did find some of the chapters and sort of short stories, I guess you could call them, very interesting and compelling, in general I just felt very disconnected to the story as a whole. I wound up giving it 3.5 out of 5 stars because, like I said, there were certain characters that I did really enjoy, and it is written in a very lovely way. I do really like just the style and flow of Jennifer Egan's writing, but as a whole, like I said, I just felt very disconnected from the characters and the story in general, so that lessened my enjoyment of it. Up next, we have The Epic Adventures of Lydia Bennet by Kate Rorick and Rachel Kiley. If you watched the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, which if you haven't, you should, it's wonderful. This is in many respects a companion novel to the series. It is not tied as closely to it as The Secret Diary of Lizzie Bennet because it follows Lydia Bennet's journeys after the series ends, after the camera turns off, after Lizzie goes off on her adventure and Jane goes off on her adventure, and Lydia is just sort of back in town, living with her parents, trying to pick up the pieces of her life that sort of fell apart throughout the course of the series. I wound up feeling a little bit lackluster about this book. I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. There were certain elements of it that I really did enjoy, and I did like spending more time with Lydia and seeing cameos from Lizzie and Jane and some of the other characters that you meet throughout the Lizzie Bennet Diaries. It was a cute book. It was a quick read. Like I said, there were some parts of it that I enjoyed, but on the whole, it was just a pretty average reading experience for me. But if you are a fan of the series and you particularly do enjoy Lydia, then you might want to check this out because it is pretty fun. Up next, we have Someday, Someday Maybe by Lauren Graham. This is a standalone contemporary novel by Lauren Graham, who you might know as Lorelai Gilmore from the series The Gilmore Girls, and it is basically about a girl named Frances, or Franny, who is trying to make it as an actress in New York City, and so it's about her living there and sort of going through all of the craziness that comes with trying to make it in the entertainment industry and make it on stage, and all of the emotions and frustrations and ups and downs that come with that kind of pursuit. Overall, this wound up being a pretty middle of the road book for me. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars because I did enjoy certain elements of the story. It was pretty cute, but the big thing that made it just sort of meh for me was Franny, the main character. I had a hard time connecting with her and just found that her insecurity that she has throughout a lot of the book seemed to be overemphasized for me, which just grated. And so I enjoyed certain side characters. The writing was fine, but there wasn't anything particularly remarkable about the book. Up next, we have The Silkworm by Robert Galbraith, aka J.K. Rowling. This is the second book in the Cormoran Strike series, which is a detective novel series about a disabled veteran turned private investigator. I read The Cuckoo's Calling, the first book in the series, back in 2014 and very much enjoyed it, and The Silkworm was a similar, just very enjoyable reading experience. This one kept me guessing until the very end. I was trying fervently to figure out who the killer was, and as soon as I learned who it was at the very end, I was like, I should have seen that coming, should have figured it out. I think the major thing that was difficult about this book for me is that we follow the story of a murdered author in the book, and so a lot of the characters are just very similar in their roles. You have his agent and his publisher and this person who worked for this publishing company and things like that, and so at certain points in the story, because there were just so many suspects that you were dealing with, they started to blend together, and I had to sort of stop and remind myself who was who. But other than that, I really, really enjoyed it. J.K. Rowling has a wonderful writing style, as pretty much everyone who's read her stuff knows, and I really love Cormoran, our main character, and Robin, his assistant, and I love to see how they grow as individuals and in their partnership from the first book to the second book in the series. So if you are a fan of detective novels and you haven't picked up this series yet, I would certainly recommend it. Up next, we have The Westing Game by Ellen Raskin. This is a middle grade sort of mystery thriller book that follows a variety of different people, most of whom live in an apartment complex called Sunset Towers. One evening, all of them are called to the mansion of the recently deceased millionaire Sam Westing and told they are all potential heirs to his fortune, but one of the people in that room has killed him, and the person who figures it out will inherit his fortune. I read this book for the first time probably around the age of 11 or 12, and it just continues to be an absolute favorite story of mine. I will love this book and always give it 5 out of 5 stars. It is such an inventive story, a fun plot. Because it is a middle grade book, it's fairly short, under 200 pages, and it reads quite quickly. All of the characters are absolutely delightful. There's both ethnic and disability diversity represented in the story, and the story as a whole is just witty and fascinating and will definitely keep you on your toes. So if you are a mystery thriller fan and or a middle grade children's fan, I would highly recommend checking this one out. Up next, we have The Forbidden Wish by Jessica Khoury. It is a retelling of Aladdin where the genie is a girl named Zara. I am a big fan of fairy tales and a big fan of retellings, evidenced by my extreme love for the Lunar Chronicles series. So I was really excited to pick up this particular standalone. I wound up really enjoying it and gave it 4 out of 5 stars. When it came to character development, I did really like the development of Zara, our genie, and of Aladdin as individuals, but I was not a huge fan of the development of their relationship. It took me a while to get on board with it. I did really enjoy a lot of the side characters, however, in particular, the princess in this story. She has this like band of like ninja warrior women that are with her and will fight to the death for her and just love her fiercely, and I loved that picture of female friendship and the strong female friendship that was represented in the relationship that she has with those women, and how those friendships are sort of passed down from generation to generation, from mother to daughter, and I really enjoyed that aspect of the story. My one major issue with this book was the ending of it. Like I said, it took me a little while to get on board with the Aladdin-Zara relationship, but I did wind up really enjoying it. But just how everything wrapped up, there were elements of it that I really liked and elements of it that I was like, oh yes, this is wonderful, it's a fairy tale, happy ending, all of those things. But the last line of this book almost made it too sugar-coated and happy for a fairy tale, which I know that might not make sense, but it makes sense in my head, I promise. But overall, like I said, I did really enjoy this and gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Up next, we have A Fierce and Subtle Poison by Samantha Mabry. This was my TBR jar pick for the month of April, which was a 2016 debut. It just took me a little while to find a 2016 debut, and then it took until the month of May for me to get this from my library. And this is a YA magical realism story about a kid named Lucas Knight, who is the son of a hotel developer who has grown up spending his summers in Old San Juan in Puerto Rico. And basically the setup of this story is that there is a house in town where there's all sorts of rumors around it about a scientist that lives there, and the rumor is that he loved his plants more than he loved his wife, which eventually drove her away, and now the house is cursed. No birds ever fly over it, and there's all these rumors about a witch that lives in that house now and all of these things. And so Lucas is just a curious person and wants to know, you know, what's going on with the house, and so he gets wrapped up in stuff that's happening and just other things. And I loved the idea of this book. It sounded really fascinating when Joss from Scobles Reads first talked about it, which is why I picked it up, but it very much fell flat for me, and I wound up only giving it 2.5 out of 5 stars. My biggest issue with the book was the main character of Lucas. I did enjoy Isabel and some of the other people that you interact with throughout the story, but Lucas was just so bland. He just did not interest me at all. He just seemed very boring and shallow and not like a person you would want to spend time with. So that sort of killed the rest of the story for me. And like I said, I gave it 2.5 out of 5 stars. Up next, we have Gemina by Amie Kaufman and J. Kristoff. This is the second book in the Illuminae Files, which is a YA sci-fi series that was started last year, and this is an advanced reader's copy. The book actually does not come out until October of this year, so I'm not going to tell you guys too much right now. I will be filming a review that will probably go up a little bit closer to the release date, but if y'all watched my stuff on Illuminae, you know that I absolutely loved it, and I loved this one as well. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I think one of my favorite things about this series as a whole is that both books feature really just strong, spunky, awesome female protagonists. And yes, there are male protagonists in both of the books as well, and romance and happy things and crazy adventures happening because people are being attacked in space and all sorts of stuff. But I just love the female protagonists that Amie and Jay have written in Illuminae, and Gemina. Yeah, I loved this book. It's wonderful. Gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Like I said, a full review of it will be coming closer to the release date, but basically just buy this one. Pre-order it now. Go ahead, because it's great. And finally, we have Attachments by Rainbow Rowell. This is an adult contemporary novel that takes place in 1999 and follows three main characters, Lincoln, Beth, and Jennifer. Beth and Jennifer are employees for the local newspaper, and Lincoln is the IT guy at the paper whose primary job is to watch the email filter and send warnings to the various employees when they are writing about things that they're not supposed to be writing about. Some of Beth and Jennifer's emails get flagged, and as is his job, Lincoln starts reading them, but finds that he just really enjoys reading them and feels like he's starting to get to know them and continues to read their emails even though he knows he's never going to send them a warning. And before he knows it, Lincoln finds himself falling for Beth, but by then it's a little bit too late to introduce himself without it being all kinds of awkward. This was so freaking adorable, guys. I loved it. I read it in basically a day. Technically I read it in 2 days, but it was only because I forced myself to stop reading it and go to bed because I needed to sleep. But it was just really, really adorable. I love the character of Lincoln and how he really is kind of shy and insecure and unsure of himself, but really grows throughout the course of the novel. And I loved Beth and Jennifer and their senses of humor and things like that. And it was just a simply adorable, cheesy, wonderful, makes you feel happy things kind of story. And if you are a fan of Rainbow Rowell, I highly recommend you check this one out because it was just adorable. I wound up giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Well, there you have it, friends. Those are the 12 books that I read in the month of May. If you have read any of them, I would love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know in the comments. If you want to follow me elsewhere online, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Goodreads, all at Sarah Ann Hayes. The links for those profiles will be in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye! There's a fly, something. What's going on here? By Kate Rorick and Rachel Kiley. Yep. Of Lydia Bennet. By Kate Rorick and Kate...